So, for the second instalment of our podcast on inspiring women in leadership, we are lucky enough to be joined by Abbie, who is a prison governor and head of residence who manages around 400 prisoners. So, it's a very, very big role. And we're going to ask Abbie a few questions, a bit about her career, her role in leadership, and also who the women are that inspire her. So, Abbie, hello.
Hi.
Hi. So, please, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career background to get where you are today.
Okay, so my name's Abbie. I'm 42. I've got 7 children and 1 grandchild, so that keeps me very busy outside of work. My career background, so before I joined the criminal justice system, I did have a few random jobs. I worked on a donut stall and in a plasticine factory, and then I worked at Superdrug while I studied at night school initially. So had my first child when I was 16, so I left full-time education, and at that point a lot of people did tell me that was it. I'd thrown any chance of a career away, and I was quite determined to prove them wrong. So I managed to catch up with my education and started university. And I knew I wanted to study sociology because I'd really enjoyed it during GCSEs. And that was really the beginnings of my preferences for criminal justice. Back at that point, while I was at uni, I really had narrowed it down to police, prison or probation. Certainly back then, I was slightly put off by the fact you had to do a fitness test for the police or prison service. I wasn't especially into sport when I was at uni, so probation seemed like the best option. Really, I just wanted to put the theory that I'd learnt into practice. And just as I was coming up to doing my finals, I saw an advert in The Guardian looking for trainee probation officers. So I thought, I've got nothing to lose, I'll apply for it. And much to my surprise, I was offered a position as a trainee. And so I left university and started a 2-year training program to become a probation officer, which involved doing another degree as well, straight after the first one. So yeah, that was really how I got started in criminal justice.
It sounds like it must have taken a lot of drive. Like when you say you'd had a child, you were working in the day, then you were doing your A levels at night. That must have taken a lot of motivation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that was I was just really determined to prove that being a teenage mum, being a single mum, that doesn't have to hold you back. It doesn't mean you've thrown your life away. And I wanted to set a good example for my daughter as well. So she started primary school as I started university. So I would drop her at the childminder in the morning, get the train to uni, obviously study, and then pick her up on the way home. So it did mean I didn't get the same sort of student social life. I missed out on living in halls of residence and some of the partying that I know some of my friends got to do, but it was absolutely worth it. And she went on to go to university in Canterbury actually, and did a nursing degree a few years ago. So I feel that I set her on the right path.
Oh, that's really brilliant. And I will say you didn't miss out with too much at the halls of residence. At least if it was anything like mine, just imagine a dentist waiting room and then live in it. But no, that's amazing. Kind of that desire to not only prove people wrong, but to prove to yourself, prove to your daughter that you are. Yeah, I'm amazed by that. That's really a lot.
Thank you.
You said you wanted to put that degree into practice. What pushed you towards a sociology degree in the first place, would you say?
I think it was probably from doing the GCSE. So I think when I chose my GCSEs, I didn't really know what sociology was especially, and there was only 4 of us that actually chose it, so we pretty much taught ourselves with textbook in the library. And for my GCSE coursework, I did a piece of research around unemployment, and I was actually able to go out to our local job centre and start interviewing some people who were sort of long-term unemployed, and I was absolutely shocked by what I found. And a lot of the men that I interviewed back then were well-rounded, really lovely, bright men who'd actually just found that the system and their lack of qualifications meant that it was financially better for them to be on benefits, particularly those who had families, than it was to find work. And they were sort of explaining to me, you know, if you've got no qualifications and you haven't had that start in life, you've really got very little options open to you. And obviously those men I interviewed hadn't chosen a career path in terms of criminality. They were just really sort of living off the state and quite unfulfilled. And it made me realise how easy it would be to choose a life of crime at that point. So I suppose that's where my interest sort of peaked. And then I decided, absolutely, I knew I wanted to do a sociology degree. There was no doubt about it, because I just wanted to understand better how our society develops those different sort of subcultures and classes, and how some people with the same start in life make very different choices, but equally that people don't start on a level footing.
From that, why did you choose a career in the prison service?
So prison and probation are very closely connected. Obviously now we are actually Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service all as one. So I'd worked alongside prison colleagues for a long time. And I suppose I'd been in probation for about 17 years. So I did a period of time as a probation officer with a caseload of offenders that I worked with. I then sort of worked my way up to middle management, and I'd spent about 10 years in different managerial roles. And I suppose there were kind of two key reasons. I think one was the fact that senior management within probation is quite small. There's very few posts, and those that are filled with very successful people who are not likely to be moving on anytime soon. So I was looking for an opportunity to develop my career. But I think also just before I left probation, I did a big piece of work around homelessness and the impact on the men and women that we work with in probation. But it also just made me realise how much of a window of opportunity when people are in custody that we have to be working with them then. And I sort of thought at that point, do you know what? I've done a lot of work in the community with offenders. Now's the time I need to take that step that comes before that and work with them in that custodial setting. And I actually stumbled across an advert for a senior leadership scheme, which was open to any background. It didn't have to be criminal justice background. Thought I'm ready for a new challenge. After 9 months, I was offered a place, and it was a big decision to leave the probation service because it was absolutely what I knew, where I was confident and comfortable. And this has absolutely pushed my comfort zone. But no regrets at all. So I joined the prison service about 18 months ago from probation, and I had to, part of the scheme is you have to train to be a prison officer first. So I went through the prison officer training that all new officers do, and then I spent 4 months in uniform on the landings being a prison officer before I could go into my first prison governor role as head of corruption prevention and counter-terrorism, which was really interesting, absolutely a learning curve and great introduction to the prison service. And then 6 months ago I moved into the head of residence role. So we have 8 wings. We have a total of about 1,100 men, and I'm responsible for 3 of those wings, all with different roles. Absolutely loving every minute of it at the moment.
It sounds amazing. For those who may be looking to going into the prison service, what's the officer training like?
I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Okay.
So
talk me through it.
they're actually just moving towards now an apprenticeship model where trainee prison officers will complete an apprenticeship. You cover a lot. So some of it are the real basics of, for example, really important but key management, how to safely use the sets of different types of keys we have. Obviously, security is a huge part of what we do. You learn a lot about how to manage that. Then there's lots of different elements around working with the prison population. I had the benefit of working with offenders previously, but in terms of, we call our prisoners residents, they do live in our prison. That's their home as well as our place of work. So you learn a lot about how to interact with them positively. We do something around interpersonal skills. I don't know if you've heard of the sort of every contact matters approach, but every interaction you have, even if it is just saying good morning to the men when you open their doors in the morning, right down to kind of more structured key work sessions that we have to try and help them resolve issues. So you do a lot of training around that as well. So really varied. There's lots of practical elements to it. So you have to be trained, for example, in how to use smoke hoods if you have to evacuate somebody, if they've set fire to their cell. And as you might imagine, within a prison setting, you do have to learn appropriate restraint techniques if you do have to physically restrain people. So there was lots of rolling around on the floor learning how to do that safely and appropriately. And then there's lots around your kind of record keeping and report writing. So for me, we did a condensed course. So we had 7 weeks of residential training. You go away to training school where they have a sort of mock prison set up with cells. You get to sometimes play being a difficult prisoner as well, which is
Oh, that
quite
sounds
fun.
Yeah.
So we did lots of hiding things we shouldn't have on our person and searching each other and learning how to use handcuffs and safely, if you have to take somebody to hospital and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots to learn, but really thoroughly enjoyable.
Yeah.
Really highly recommend it to anybody
Yeah.
who's interested in that field.
And I imagine you get to know the people that you're learning alongside quite
Yeah.
well, especially if you're hiding things on each other and looking for them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's
Yeah.
one thing that I was told when I joined the prison service is a family. They do become your family. You absolutely trust each other, with your safety, with your lives ultimately. And so there is a really close and supportive network between, all those people you walk alongside.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the shows we watched growing up, such as Orange is the New Black, etc., paint officers in a certain way. And I think what you're telling me certainly is that role of every contact matters, that pastoral side of it, and the
Yeah.
caring nature that is actually needed to work in one of those settings.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's one of the important things. And I know our number one governor, who obviously is responsible for our whole establishment, he makes very clear when any new officers join that if you've come here just to lock people up, you are in the wrong place. That is not what we're about. Of course, we have to protect the public, and that's a really important part of our role. But actually, the time that those men and women have with us, we have an opportunity to work with them. And absolutely, we need people from all walks of life bringing their life experience and their views with them to support them along that journey, hopefully towards rehabilitation and a better future.
It sounds like an amazing program. So you said you had a lot of different leadership roles at several different levels. What was your first leadership role and what challenges did that present?
My first middle management position was as integrated offender management project manager. It was a bit of a mouthful. We shortened it to IOM. And that integrated offender management is a multi-agency project. You have the kind of 3 core agencies of police, prison and probation working together, but also alongside substance misuse work, accommodation agencies, volunteers. And the idea is that you take this multi-agency approach to managing the most prolific, the most difficult offenders that we were working with, to try and put that package around them, both to support them and try and aid rehabilitation, but also sometimes that was around catching and convicting them as well. So I joined that project as the manager at Kent and Medway, and it was really challenging in the beginning, mainly because all of our different agencies do have slightly different values, different aims and objectives. I just remember those early days where, my police colleagues were very much focused on, we need to get these people off the streets, we need to catch them, we need to get them to court, we need to get them to prison. And then you would have the prison and probation staff saying, yes, but what then? What when they're released? They'll still present a risk of offending and a risk of harm to the community. So we really had a challenge on our hands to try and find where our objectives overlapped. And how we could effectively measure what we were doing to prove that the outcomes were what they were intended to be. And I suppose that was a big challenge for me, because prior to that, I'd, worked a lot with individuals around managing risk and managing offending. But what I hadn't done is the side of things around performance management and how you actually demonstrate a project is having the desired sort of impact. So yeah, that was a real eye-opener. And certainly I think in the early days there was a lot of resistance. I think particularly police and probation weren't natural bedfellows. I think sometimes the police thought probation was sort of pink and fluffy and just wanted to help people and didn't understand the risks, and probation just thought police wanted to lock everybody up. And we soon realised that actually there's a lot of overlap, and particularly working alongside some of the volunteers were amazing. And yes, we started off with a small cohort, and I was in that role for sort of 3 years. The other big challenge for me for that was it was quite high profile, and there was quite a lot of interest sort of ministerially into how we were progressing. So it was the first time really I had to report back very frequently on how the project was going. And ultimately, towards the end of that 3 years, it was embedded as, business as usual.
That's quite a deep end role, isn't it? Though, because it's like you're saying, it is a challenge to get three services which have one overarching goal, but then obviously they all have their own different priorities. So that is certainly a
Absolutely.
challenging jump into leadership for sure. What do you think are the most important traits for someone in a leadership position?
I think for me, one of the most important things is to be able to balance standing back and kind of looking at the bigger strategic picture, understanding, the direction your organization needs to take, and that sort of political environment, certainly within justice, is really important. But then also being able to stand alongside all of the people impacted by your agency. So for me, that will include my staffing group, the prisoners, absolutely thinking about victims and communities, but also being able to take the perspective of all the different agencies that we work with. So
Yeah.
I think, any leader needs to be able to take that sort of step in to be able to walk alongside, whether it's their customers or their clients or however you want to see it, but then
Yeah.
step back and see that bigger picture, and to be able to do that many times a day to continually
Yes.
kind of evaluate what's going on at sort of micro ground level, and then what's going on in terms of that much bigger kind of political and economic environment as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. Also, communication is key. It's really, really critical to be able to ensure that you're both listening and taking on board that feedback in whatever way you're giving it, so you can really understand what happens on a day-to-day basis and all that kind of ripple effect of who that impacts upon. But also then being able to communicate to all of those people. A lot of what we do as a leadership team is looking at our key messages and values and instructions and how we put those across, but also how we take feedback. Just a small example for me in doing that is we have a residents consultative forum to
Yeah.
give everybody a voice, to be able to really listen to those experiences and use that information, not just listen, but to be able to then act upon what you're taking in as well.
Yeah. I think earlier when you highlighted the importance of trust amongst all of you within the prison as staff is obviously something that can't change no matter where you are. So that sense you can trust everyone that works for you and you trust them to
Yeah, absolutely.
do that. Wonderful. Thank you. In your position now, what is your favourite part of your job?
So at the moment, whilst I'm head of residence, a big part of my job is the time I spend on the wings with our residents and with the staff. And it's absolutely my favourite part of the job. We do get bogged down with lots of meetings and things that we do have to attend, but I
Yeah.
do try to get round to all of my wings every day. And just to kind of feel, the atmosphere does change day to day. It's particularly tough at the moment because of the amount of time the men have spent behind their doors in their cells due to the pandemic. So yeah, I just love that opportunity to stand on the landings and hear the experiences of the men, whether that's their experience today or hearing some of their life experiences.
Yeah.
And for me, it's kind of understanding their journey, how they've ended up where they are and what their onward journey will be. But also just getting to kind of chat with the staff. And, it is a tough job. It can be quite pressured and stressful and quite difficult at times, but it also can be really uplifting and quite funny at times. And just having that chance to informally, as well as the formal routes, just go and hear how people's days are going and what more we can do to make things better, both for staff and the men. So yeah, that's my
Yeah.
favourite part.
I was going to say you must hear an awful lot of interesting stories and backgrounds, so it must be quite a pleasure, I imagine, to kind of hear all of those
Definitely,
different life
yeah, and
experiences.
it's a privilege because
Mm.
some of the men haven't had that opportunity for somebody just to listen, and our
Yeah.
officers are doing that day in day out. And I will say as well, I think one of my favourite things about it was the same in probation as it is in prison, but
Yeah.
no 2 days are ever the same, and there's never a dull moment. There's always a story to tell. You're continually learning. I was in probation for nearly 20 years and absolutely was still learning every day. And now, I'm quite new to the prison service, so there's an awful lot to learn. But
Yeah.
even with very experienced colleagues who've been in the job 20 or 30 years, they are still learning new things every day. And I think that keeps you energized. So yeah,
Yeah.
really enjoyable.
Oh, wonderful. I think I can definitely relate. The best part is just the people you work
Yeah.
with, always the best part, I think. Obviously, you've got this role now in a senior leadership position. What is the lasting impact you want to leave behind in your role or roles that you aspire to have?
For me, it is about change. I absolutely believe that everybody has the ability and can change. That's going to be much harder for some people than others. But I never give up that hope that somebody can, even after many, many years in an entrenched criminal lifestyle, can still make that choice to move away from it. So it's about recognizing that every person within our walls, whether they are there as a prisoner or as a member of staff, brings those experiences with them that they've had throughout their lifetime. And for some people, they've had really adverse experiences which have had horrendous impact on them. And it's about how we can put the most appropriate support around people. So, ultimately, a huge part of our role is protecting the public. And I still, in terms of lasting change, any victim that we protect or any potential victim that we stop becoming a victim, that is ultimately the most important thing that we do. But it's also then about empowering the men and women that we work with to be able to go on and lead a law-abiding, fulfilling life. And when you're working with somebody, sometimes there's that penny drop moment, that light bulb moment, and you can see that they know that there is a choice there. There is that chance to move on and have that fulfilling life. That is the most rewarding thing that you can get from this job. Within my leadership role, a lot of my focus is around how we train and develop our staff and our resources to be able to give those people who've been convicted of an offence the best opportunity in life. Yes, we have to keep them locked up for the duration of their sentence, but we've got a captive audience. We've got that opportunity to really intervene and identify what has led them to do the things that they've done and what can lead them away from it. That's absolutely the most important thing to me is change. It's not an easy task, and it's not something I don't think you ever get to the point of completing and saying, yes, that's done, because there will always be people with a new story, a new journey, a new experience. So the better equipped we can make our staff to be able to support those individuals, the better it is for society as a whole.
Really lovely answer. A really positive look at the service itself. And I think, like you say, protecting victims and preventing people from becoming victims is so important. But when you've got them there, it is looking after them and trying to look forward rather than be like, you're here for this sentence, you'll stay in the prison. It's a case of, here is a chance for you to learn, talk, have someone to listen, as you and your staff very much do. So wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the prison service is considered to be a male-dominated industry. Would you agree or disagree with that? And what challenges does it present, if so?
I would agree to a certain extent. Certainly when I was within probation, that's actually quite a female dominated area. It's quite hard to find people who want to train to become a male probation officer. So I'd had quite a different experience within that field. And I know when I joined the prison service, it can feel quite male dominated, and there's still quite a culture of machismo which sometimes can be quite difficult to infiltrate.
You're going to have to hit me with a definition of machismo, I'm afraid.
So I suppose there are a number of staff and residents as well who invest quite a lot in their sort of male strength and domineering, and feel that they have to prove themselves as a man, which sometimes, certainly for the residents, can come manifest in aggression and actual violence. And I think coming into that environment, it was certainly something I was quite anxious about. I'm 5 foot. I'm not a particularly large, strong woman. But when you do your prison officer training, you soon learn that actually appropriate control and restraint, where it's sort of necessary and proportionate, is about techniques. It's not about brute strength or power. So that gave me some confidence that actually I wasn't going to be at a disadvantage being a short woman, which does get commented upon my my small height. But I think also some of the messages I'd been given was that within the prison service, a lot of the senior leadership teams were very male dominated. And I understand that actually my own senior leadership team didn't have many females on it at all until quite recently. And it's been something they've been working to kind of redress that balance. But actually, now I've joined the service and feel more sort of embedded within that team, generally it's not too much of an issue. The only thing I do sometimes notice is still if I am going somewhere with a male governor, I'll often find that some of the staff and the men will address their questions to the male governor before they speak to me. And it was very strange. I have described it was a bit like going back in time. When I first joined the prison service, it felt a bit 1980s in some of the views and attitudes and quite discriminatory comments and things that were made. But what I've been really pleased to see is I think the service as a whole is really trying to address that in terms of improving diversity and equality, not just through delivering training, because that's just one element, but actually integrating that within all of our services across staff and the resident group. So I think there's still some way to go. And there will always be some men that we work with as residents who do have quite discriminatory views, but I do feel attitudes have shifted, not always with great effect. I mean, one of the comments that's often made is a few years ago it used to be more unheard of for prisoners to assault female staff because it was quite frowned upon among their peers, is that it was okay to assault a male member of staff but not a female. And actually that view doesn't seem to be there so much now. So I don't know if that's sort of indicative of the men thinking they're being equal and inclusive by assaulting men and women equally, but so there's still lots of challenges, but there's lots of work happening, I think, to improve things.
Attacking anyone is one way of looking at equality and diversity, isn't it? But no, that's really lovely. I think clearly you yourself, now a part of that senior leadership team, is a part of that culture of change, looking towards the future and reviewing that service and being like, this is the image we have and we want to change that and we want to make it as accessible for everyone as possible, which is the best thing you can ask from any leadership team.
And I think that's one of the reasons that they designed the senior leadership team that I'm on to be more inclusive. So the leaders program that I'm doing, as I mentioned earlier, it was open to any applicant. You didn't have to have a prison or probation background. And part of that is bringing in skills and experience from other sectors. So we've had all sorts of people join our scheme who've never worked within the criminal justice system, but they bring ideas and experiences that we wouldn't necessarily have if everybody in leadership has worked their way up through the ranks and only been within that service. So it's been really beneficial, and it just gives a different perspective, a different viewpoint, and hopefully to the benefit of all those we're working with.
Amazing. Thank you. Do you feel that being a woman has had an impact on your career?
Yeah, definitely. I think there has been times where I've felt that I've had to work harder than some of my male colleagues to sort of prove myself. And a kind of example of that, whilst I was trying to get into middle management, I undertook a leadership and management qualification. I did a coaching qualification. I kind of really pushed myself to get more skills and experience. And yet I found there were sometimes male colleagues who were promoted into management without having done any of those additional things. You know, and it's not a criticism, because I don't know if that was about their individual skills and experience, and it may have been very much merit based, but it just felt like I had to work harder. And I would say as well, it's been a real challenge getting that work-life balance right. And I think particularly having quite a big family, especially now where I have 7 children, one's an adult, but the rest are still dependent. I always feel very conscious that I don't want my family life to impact on my work. So there has been times where for example, when the children have been unwell, where I have been reluctant to take time off work, and that is very, very difficult. But I think that's probably a challenge to all parents, not necessarily just mothers. I think it's very difficult to get that balance right. But I have noticed that throughout my career, people have often been more critical of women taking time off to care for family, what I've seen is it tends to fall to the mother. Not always, and it's certainly not a criticism of anybody. So yeah, that's been quite tough. But I think there's been lots of benefits as well. And certainly I think working with men and women who've been convicted of criminal offences, I think sometimes they found it easier to talk to a woman, and perhaps I've maybe been able to get more information, more understanding of them. Not always, but still now I think, I know there's men that I'm working with that just feel more comfortable opening up, and perhaps that comes back to that element of machismo of having to kind of keep up a front. Definitely. So that's probably been quite a benefit. As I said, I thought my actual physical stature was going to be a negative coming into the prison service, and I think when I look back to when I was at university and I considered that as a career back then, I think they did still actually have a height limitation. I think you had to be over 5'3" or 5'6" or something like that. Either way, I wouldn't have met the criteria. Whereas now they don't have that. As long as you can meet the fitness test and you can pass the training, they don't have those same restrictions. So I do think, as a society, we are moving towards being more inclusive. There are still times where you do feel it does have an impact, both positively and negatively.
Good to see those changes being made, because I don't think I'd do very well going to a job interview on stilts. I was all right in primary school. You had the bucket stilts. They were fine.
Yes, I need those.
You feel completely equipped in your training to deal with that, aside from stature and everything. So
yeah. It's all about technique.
It's great to hear kind of how you feel it's affected your career from both sides, in both a positive light and perhaps a negative. I was going to say, it must be a lot managing that work-life balance when you do have such a huge family. That must feel quite...
It is difficult.
Would you say you've got better at it over time, or does it always present new challenges?
It does. So I think as my family have grown up, my youngest children are 12 at the moment, I think they very much do understand the importance of my career. And although there are times I haven't always been able to attend school plays and things like that, I'm hoping that it's given them all the inspiration to be able to work towards their very different careers that they are interested in. So I think they do see both sides of it, but there are still occasionally times you just feel that tear between, I want to be there for my family, but I absolutely really need to invest the time in my career and my role. So I think it'll always be a little bit of a conflict.
It will always be there, but what's life without a few challenges?
Absolutely.
What advice would you give to a student currently considering their career options?
I would say to really think about what you enjoy, what gives you pleasure and fun, what you're good at, and then balance that up as well with what's actually available. And I think if you can get those three elements, if you can find something you enjoy with something you're good at, that there are opportunities to go into, I think you've got the best opportunity to find that job satisfaction and really enjoy getting up and going to work. And I know every day I get up, I look forward to my day. It's hard, it's grueling, it is stressful at times, but I get a huge amount of satisfaction out of it. I would also say as well, and some of my children are at that point of planning their careers, is not to feel restricted that you have to pick one, and that actually there's plenty of time to explore different career options. And just because you choose something initially doesn't mean you can't later on do something very, very different. What I would also really recommend, if students are able to, is to either get some volunteering work or some sort of work experience in the field that they're looking to go into. I know I've certainly interviewed lots of criminology students who are really keen to come into prison or probation, and it's often because they've got really good theoretical understanding, they find it really interesting. But if they haven't actually worked with that population, sometimes they do find themselves quite shocked by the nature of the people that they're working with. They're not always prepared for the aggression, the trauma they have to deal with, and sometimes just the certain sights you'll see and odours you'll smell and the real kind of nitty gritty of it. Whereas I know those students who've had the opportunity to, for example, perhaps volunteer with the homeless, they get a much better understanding of the real picture and what it's really like to work with that group. So I
Yeah.
think whatever field people are looking at, and I know sometimes it's challenging to find those opportunities, but if people can get that taster, even if it's quite short, it really does give you a good grounding for applications, but also
Yeah.
a much better idea of what that career is going to sort of be like on a
Yeah.
day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probation run a volunteer program, and that is a really good opportunity to start to work with that cohort of people. There's some quite specialist ones as well. So there's a volunteering group called Circles of Support, which is specifically around working with men who are convicted of sexual offences. A lot of students have managed to get some experience within working for circles, and it's been invaluable. And
Yeah.
you know at that stage whether, yeah, I love this is what I want to do, or not, and
Yeah.
consider other
Yeah.
options. So yeah, it
Yeah.
is tough, but there are opportunities out there.
I think it's very much a case of theory doesn't teach you everything, does it? It's seeing it for yourself is when you know, okay, no, I like this, I'll be good at
Yeah.
this, or I'm terrified and I'm going to run away from that smell.
Yes. Yes.
And then just finally, who are the women that inspire you?
The first person who springs to mind for me is Pip Hare, who's a British female sailor, and she's just
Yeah.
very recently completed the Vendée Globe, 24,000 miles sailing around the world by herself.
Oh, wow.
And she is such an inspirational woman. And there's some great videos out there of her talking really frankly about how she's managed the physical and mental demands of doing such a difficult and grueling challenge by herself. There was a quote that she gave before she set out on her challenge, and that was that more men have walked the moon than women have completed the Vendée Globe, which is all the inspiration I need to succeed. I
Brilliant.
felt quite empowered by that. So yeah, whenever
Yeah.
I have those moments where I think I can't do this, I just think of Pip out there in the ocean by herself battling it, and I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I can do it. But on a more personal note, I would say I've been really lucky to have some fantastic female line managers over the years who just have been really inspirational in believing in me, but also helping me to believe in others. And I think that's very much where I've developed that sense of hope. For the most difficult offender you can work with, there is still a glimmer of hope, and being able to see that change in people. Yeah, there's some people I owe some really big thanks to for helping me along my career journey. I think of them often, and some of those inspirational messages they gave me very early on in my career that still
Yeah.
stay with me.
And I'm sure you'll get the same thanks from many people that you look after as well. I can
Thank
imagine
you.
for sure. It's been an absolute pleasure to get to know you and talk to you about your career, about your outlook and experience. It's been
Thank
really,
you.
really, really wonderful. Thank you so much. A huge thank you to Abbie, the head of residence, for sitting down with us today and talking to us about her experience.